Currently live on Twitch.
Awesome.
There
There
we
we
go.
Gotta move this and
Oh, we're not quite.
actually see it?
Bam. That is us.
good evening,
Welcome. Welcome. Good evening, Max.
Ben. Good to see you.
Good to see you as well. Welcome everybody that is viewing this either live right now or at a later date to the very first episode of Max and Ben Save the World, a men's mental health podcast. My name is Ben Spiker,
And I'm Max Soderberg.
and we're glad to have you here.
So, welcome to our podcast, where we talk about men, boys, and the topics that matter most to them. We hope to make a difference in this big and sometimes sad world. A few disclaimers before we start. Sometimes you might disagree with what you hear on this podcast. Maybe you're a liberal and think we're, in a different way. Maybe you think we're conservative and think in a different way. But I encourage you not to turn off our podcast. If you are not participating in the dialogue or willing to do that, then we're not really moving forward. We're really just kind of stuck in this path of not working with each other. And so we want you to be able to listen if you feel like you disagree with us. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. In addition, this podcast is not therapy. So this is a men's mental health podcast. And so I'm a therapist. He's a therapist. But this podcast is not therapy. Also, go to therapy. That sounds like a good plan.
This podcast is in no way a replacement for therapy. But we're going to talk about things that are important to mental health, things that are important to men, and what masculinity is and is all about.
And we hope to make a difference for you too. Obviously, we encourage you to go find your own therapist. But yeah, we hope that you find this podcast to be helpful because we're excited to bring some of our wonderful and deep conversations that we have together to the public. So, yeah. Without further ado, I think there's a recognition that we're going to start the podcast with.
Yeah, and I think that today's recognition is going to be that of men in education roles, whether that's teaching or teaching adjacent, people that are out there providing good example and providing quality relationships with students don't get enough recognition and enough credit in our society. And we want to bring special attention to that today. We appreciate you.
That's awesome. Yeah, I work in an education setting. I know you spent some time there too. And absolutely. Men in those settings, thanks for being willing to step up.
Yeah. Why don't you introduce us to today's topic, Max?
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking a little bit about internet culture and the ways that it affects men, especially through their eyes as a consumer. I think that this is a very rich topic, to be honest, because I think everyone is touched by the internet in some ways nowadays, especially in the post-COVID era. And I think that we need to examine specifically how men are engaging in that way. But I think you'll also find that a lot of times we'll be talking about things that will be applicable to everyone as well. But we also want to kind of zoom in on men's experiences in particular there. And so, kind of where we're starting here, our first question was, what are men's websites that guys are using on the internet? What do you think, Ben?
I think that first I want to acknowledge that I think that for a lot of my experience as a man on the internet and young man on the internet, it took a long time and continues to take some dedication to think when I'm interacting with others on the internet. I think my default assumption is that I am, or it has been for a long time, that I'm interacting with another man. So, if I'm talking to somebody, whether that's in YouTube comments or on Reddit or somewhere like that, I think to me for a long time the unknowable face of an anonymous other user is assumed to be male, and I think that's probably influenced some by I was a World of Warcraft kid, and so that community in and of itself has all sorts of jokes about how it's a male-led space, but specifically to that, I think that's one of those spaces. I think that if you're always on gaming forums, it's easy to assume that you're talking to other men, or you're always on a space like what do we have listed, like Reddit.
Yeah.
Uh,
There is an assumption that the internet is a men's space, I think,
Yeah.
is an important thing to acknowledge there. I remember there were several memes many years ago about, there are no girls on the internet,
Yeah.
and if someone claimed to be a girl on the internet, they'd be like, proof. And that's, like,
Yes.
oh, can you please show, and then
Yeah.
that's pretty sketchy.
yeah,
Once you
that
kind of get into
gone
that
somewhere else
territory.
as well. Yeah.
Yeah, which is, just ridiculous. But, at the same time, so you kind of assume that the internet is a place for men. Also, I think that men can do a lot of things on the internet because they're not afraid of they have anonymity.
Yes,
They're
I
not
think
necessarily
that's an
afraid of
important
repercussions
acknowledgement.
for doing things.
Yes.
And we're gonna get to like challenges for men on the internet, but I guess how are men using the internet is where we
Yeah.
kind of wanted to start
Yeah.
as well. And so
So with that said, I think to call a spade a spade, from what I understand or my most recent understanding of the data, Reddit, for example, has a higher male user base than Twitter. Right? There are
not surprising.
spaces where demographically men are overrepresented compared to the general population and compared to the even the internet using population, right? I think if you were to compare like Instagram users to Reddit users, you would find this pattern as well.
Though there is a meaningful following of fitness Instagram for men
certainly,
that I've
certainly.
I've at least noticed in my time on Instagram. But yeah, I mean, men are using websites in different ways, and yeah. So I think we had also mentioned, like a lot of guys, and then we think about older people on like Facebook is a thing, and then I also think that men are spending a lot of time like doing shopping online too.
Yeah.
Certainly, there's a lot of ads that are telling me that some people are doing shopping, even if it's not me, even though it is me. Well, I'm not gonna lie, it's me. I'm buying all those things from Jeff Bezos. That's just kind of a fact of life nowadays. Something we did mention here, pornography is a thing that men are definitely accessing online.
And I think there's a significant portion of the pornographic space of the internet that is, I mean, inherently, because and there's all sorts of factors, most of which is money, that space is geared towards men. They're aware that, sales conversions, people, the most likely person to type a credit card in is going to be a man. And so,
Yeah.
at least in the way that they're
Pornhub,
designed,
reflecting that.
Yeah, reflect that. Yeah.
Yeah, and the content that they make, and then the way that they advertise.
Yeah. I think we had a couple other spaces. I mean, there are places that maybe aren't necessarily as men coded that still have male spaces or representation on the internet. You can find. I mean, this is a podcast that you're listening to right now on Twitch, but Joe Rogan's Spotify podcast. There's all sorts of. I mean. Elephant in the Room is Andrew Tate as well.
Yeah.
Is specifically a men's podcast for lifestyle.
Andrew Tate was initially popularized on TikTok too, and so
TikTok.
TikTok is definitely.
We haven't even talked about that yet. Talk
Yeah.
about some TikTok.
Talk about TikTok. I'm not
Yeah.
the one who uses TikTok among the two of us.
Yeah, that's true.
You're the TikTok
That's true.
guru.
What's your perception of TikTok as a non-user?
My perception of TikTok as a non-user is I don't care for TikTok. I actually
Sure.
really I like reading something. If I'm playing a video game and I'm trying to get through something and I have to go watch a video to find out how to do something, I roll my eyes
Preach.
hardcore. And I'm
Preach.
just like, no thank you. I don't want to
Yeah.
do that. I
Yeah,
want
I
to
don't
read
wanna
the
know the
text
location
and
of this.
tell me where
Yeah.
to go in this Zelda
Yeah.
dungeon. Please
Yeah.
and thank you.
That chest will stay closed.
That
I
chest will
guess.
stay closed.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So to me, TikTok is like I don't really understand the purpose of like browsing it. Like occasionally, I'll stop at like a video on Reddit or Instagram and be like, yeah, I want to like do that and listen to that. But I feel like TikTok is so like sound oriented where I have to have like headphones in, and I'm really just taking a passing moment in like the public bathroom. It's like, do I really want sound to be playing there? And so to me, I don't find time to scroll TikTok. It's just kind of like why would I do that? There's other things that I kind of would do with my time.
I think that's a good point. You don't necessarily want to be scrolling it in public.
Yeah.
And I wonder if TikTok would have been successful had the idea been presented at a younger state in the internet. To me, it seems like TikTok entered at this perfect time where I still think you shouldn't be the guy with the boombox on the subway or on the bus. However, it seems like socially we've maybe turned down how much of a taboo that is.
Yeah.
And I think TikTok represents like, you know, you
Some
can be in
cultural
line at
shifts.
Chipotle and
Yeah.
the person in
Looking
front
at
of
TikTok.
you is full volume listening to whatever they want on their whole feed.
Well, in addition, like a lot of people are just wearing earbuds, like just
True.
perpetually nowadays. I know that you see it in the schools as well. You know, teenagers with their earbuds trying to hide it from their teachers or whatever.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that a lot of folks are just able to use TikTok kind of liberally.
Yeah.
That way.
And at the risk of being old man who shakes his fist at cloud about this,
I was trying to avoid doing that, but
I'll do it. The gas station. Everybody at the gas station has an earphone in whenever you go to the gas station. And
the workers, you mean?
Yeah, I'm
Yes,
exaggerating.
the workers, yeah.
And I'm here for it. Like, I think if you don't need to be standing at work, get a chair. If you don't need to talk to people at work, have headphones in. I question whether or not somebody running a cash register does need to talk to people. So maybe that'll be my old man.
I think that there's some generational shifts
Yeah,
occurring
certainly.
where it seems that older folks are really used to having like people talk to them at registers and stuff, but younger folks are kind of like, this is an impersonal interaction. You know, we're doing a transaction and that's it, and we're kind of done. And so there are differences there. I also think that if we're talking about how men are using the internet, there's generational differences in terms of how they're using the internet too.
I was just gonna say.
I was gonna say, any young person nowadays would say, oh, Facebook is for old people. Even I'm just 32, the ripe old age of 32, have kind of fallen out of use of Facebook other than checking it. If I was invited to some event or something. And just kind of see.
It's a great calendar.
It's a great calendar. Yes.
Yes. Facebook is a wonderful calendar.
Just about everyone my age has Facebook, and those. Yeah, if you're trying to organize something, it's super easy to do it on there. But yeah, Instagram, Snapchat have really taken over like with young people, and then TikTok as well. And so generationally, we're seeing differences between younger and older men and people broadly in terms of how they're using the internet.
I want to talk about what some of these spaces that we've mentioned, maybe some more in depth. Is that the time is that the thing we have scheduled to do?
Yeah.
Because I've had a thought that I think would be good to fit here.
I think
and that
we should
is
share. And then I want to zoom in a little bit more on how men are using the internet and like male experiences.
Well, and that's what I'm thinking. As a man that uses the internet, now that we've kind of set aside the or we've set bare this is our generational lens upon the internet. This is how we as two men that are in their early 30s interact with the internet. Some of these places that we've mentioned, I don't go on Twitter. I don't tweet. I'm not a Twitter person. I read if a tweet is particularly good. I don't know this, but I assume that if a tweet is particularly good, it'll reach me. Whether it used to be through Reddit, I used to be on Reddit a lot more, or somebody will screenshot it and put it on TikTok. And I just assume that whatever I'm missing is the vitriol that people describe when they describe Twitter as a vitriolic place. Because I get really funny stuff.
I believe you're missing what it's actually called now. It's called X.
Oh, X. I am so sorry.
The platform formerly known as Twitter.
The platform formerly known as Twitter. X. Yes. I don't really go on Twitter. I used to be on Reddit every day. I'm on
Reddit every day.
Yeah. And I'm on Reddit as I need it. Which is to say, I am now not on Reddit every day, and that was a conscious choice that I made. I don't know if it was good. I'm not one of these people that's like, I unplugged from this thing and it improved my life so much. No, I started reading a fair bit more, and then slowly the use of Facebook or
you mean
Instagram.
reading books?
Reading books.
I was gonna say yes.
Yeah, specifically reading books. Reading books a fair bit more. And comic books as well, which I consider literature anyway. And slowly, other things like Facebook filled in some of that gap. TikTok has filled in some of that gap of that social feed thing. I do
Just
find
what your friends are doing.
Yeah, a bit processing out loud live for everyone at home right now. I do think that looking or reflecting upon that, Reddit provided me. Some level of out of the cultural zeitgeist would come out these, a new scientific article or something like that I found very valuable.
Yeah.
And I somewhat missed that aspect. I think that my tickling my brain in that learning way still gets done. in reading books and things like that, and I seek out some of those articles more. I might see like a news article or hear about something on Twitter, and then I'll go, okay, what are the scientific journals actually saying? Because there's a lot of armchair psychology on
Google
TikTok.
Scholar.
But Reddit, it sits in this place for me. Where if I want to know the answer to something, like where's that chest in Zelda, or what do I do about the stripped screw that I'm trying to take out of my wall, or what's the best way to deal with a rodent trying to get in, or things like that.
Yeah,
I'll put Reddit.com at the end of the Google search, because
Reddit has a lot of discourse about
Yeah.
something, especially if you can't find something. It's like, someone has certainly asked this question on, like, what particular advice do you have for this medical condition that's going on? And then they go to Reddit, rather than their doctor, which is a whole thing. But I think, we're kind of coming into this place of how are men using the internet, and you're describing, the internet is a source of information.
Yes.
Whereas, guys would used to, kind of be on the toilet and read the newspaper is like a picture I feel like that, everyone was kind of familiar with for many years. Now everyone's scrolling their phone on the toilet because the phone is, your source of information. You're getting all your news from Reddit, from Instagram, at least the news that's important to you, that's targeted towards you, because the platforms, let's be clear, are targeting you with their algorithms and the information that they are putting out. They think that you are going to read their thing. They think you're going to click that thing. And so they're going to try and show it to you to see if you're going to click it. And then they use that information to try and give you more things for you to click on, which is actually really interesting.
Yeah.
Other ways that men are using the internet, I do want to think about, Reddit. If we're looking at, some of those places, Reddit, Instagram, are communities. They're online communities. There are, obviously targeted online communities as well, such as like Discord, where, you can join subreddit's Discord server, and then you're doing a different kind of chatting there. You can go into like voice chat rooms and things like that. And so men are very much like finding community online in ways that I think, people weren't, many, many years ago. I think that in a lot of ways, like online has kind of become like the third place. If the first place is your work, the second place is your home. The third place used to be, kind of like your church or your gym. I know a lot of guys like at my gym. But, now...
Or the bar.
Or the bar, right? The bar.
We're in the Midwest.
We're in the Midwest. Yeah, well, I think the greatest global pastime is intentionally poisoning yourself, if you know what I mean. But, so the internet can be a third place. Certain Discord servers, certain subreddits where people feel very much at home. And I think the reality for a lot of men nowadays is that the internet, really is the third place for them. That there's not even another third place, like in person. And I think that we kind of have to think about, what are the ramifications of that? I think there's an assumption that folks, guys who are on the internet, all day, every day like that are, unhealthy or something like that. And, the question is, well, is it interfering with their daily life? I know that if we look at the, DSM, the psychology, kind of book that says, how is life going? It has the diagnoses for mental health disorders such as major depressive disorder in it. And one of the clauses that's in just about every mental health disorder is, is it interfering with your daily life? And so I really like that clause because I think it makes it really clear that, if something's interfering with someone's daily life or frankly the lives of others, then that actually, kind of means something more to me. Where if it's just, if this person is just preferring to be on the internet and they're enjoying playing Fortnite, nightly with all their guy friends online from across the globe, then I think that that's great. As long as they're, keeping up with their health and, working and doing whatever else, I think that that's, just fine and dandy. But at the same time, is something lost without the interpersonal interaction that's in person? I'm
curious about that. I just read a study yesterday. Actually, it was completed in 2017, and now I don't recall anything that specified whether or not online or in person was controlled for. Right, I think it was in person specifically was what this study was, but they found a significant decrease in instances of anxiety, depression, and cancer risk among men that spend time with other men engaging in shared activities or shared interests twice per week.
Yeah, that's not surprising.
And twice per week, that's the thing that nailed me. Sitting next to a guy that I interact with in a shared interest at least once per week, the twice per week thing nailed me. I thought about that. That was a wow. I feel like my interactions with my friend group, the like regular interactions that we have, are very fulfilling to me. I do think that I think somewhat I'm reading that data, and you personalize information that you take in, and you measure yourself against it, and I think I came away from that article feeling like, I think that I just inherently gave myself the internet benefit of the doubt of like the amount that I also spend my time online playing games with friends, whether it's playing Magic the Gathering with you or games with other people. I was like, oh well, I hope that counts as my second day per week. That was the thought that I walked away from.
You
that.
could say 1.5.
Yeah,
One and a half.
I would hope it's at least 1.5, right?
And if you're doing it 2 days, 2 days online, 1 day in person, well, then obviously the two halves make a whole.
They obviously,
obviously,
the cancer will stay away forever.
No cancer. Yes.
No cancer
perfect,
allowed.
Perfect body.
Yep.
Yes. And as we obviously all learn in COVID, sometimes we need in-person interaction a little bit more than we might expect.
Yeah.
How
do you think that COVID, summarize for me in less than an hour? How do you think COVID impacted the internet use of men?
I think that COVID increased the internet use of men in a lot of ways, and I think that
everybody. Right?
It also really amplified like the negative effects of the internet. So we've talked a little bit how men are using the internet, and our next section actually is about what are the challenges that men face on the internet, and I do think that COVID is uniquely one of those things that highlighted a lot of those challenges, and so. What you said really sticks to me about that study where increased cancer risk in addition to a lot of other different things. I also remember reading studies before that folks who live alone are like more likely to die of like heart attacks or like wild things like that, which is so interesting, or that they're more at risk for like cognitive decline.
Yeah, I think there was some stuff about coronary issues as well in the article.
And so if we take a look at masculinity as a whole, there's definitely a pressure to be more independent. And so, I do know that COVID came with increased domestic violence, right? And so, folks who were in families, really difficult time for a lot of them. I remember working with my clients, seeing just every week, just like get worse and worse in the family because they were just always all together needing to.
It was an intense stressor.
It was a really, really intense time in the world, and really, really, really difficult. But I do think that if men are needing to be in community with other people, and they're really encouraged to be independent and to be able to take all these stressors, and they're not really able to offload it anywhere else, and there's a pressure to not offload it anywhere else because you really have to perform as the head of your household, or even just for your own like home. I remember I was just single. It was just me during the lockdown, and so if it's really just you're supposed to do things kind of like by yourself. So there's a pressure to do that and not necessarily reach out and be with other people, and I think that is difficult. And even if you are reaching out and being with other people, I think that a lot of men are just using online as like this easy kind of layup, like this is how I'm doing with other hanging out with other people this week. I'm not necessarily going to the gym and talking to the guys who go there between 5 and 6. I'm not going to live Magic night because I'd rather just do digital. I had a really tough week at work. Stuff like that. And I do think that there's a lot of value to be had in in-person interaction. I do think that there is an extent to which for many men, that if they're using the internet a lot, and that's the source of all of their social interaction, might be struggling a little bit. So I know that when I have not seen people in a week, a lot of times I'll have a busy week at work and I'll just be like, I just want to veg out this weekend. I'm usually sad at the end of the weekend because I was just like, well, I didn't want that. And I think that men, at least more than one man that I know are having experiences of loneliness fairly frequently. And I think that there's been many articles that I've seen on the internet that I deeply resonate with, that guys just aren't, kind of doing okay. And I think that somehow we equate this to the internet. I don't know. What do you think about that? Do you think that we can like equate like loneliness with men to their internet use, or is it like broadly something different?
Yeah, I'm curious about it. And at the risk of accelerating us into the next topic, but also going back to a little bit what we were talking about with generational experiences of the internet.
Yeah.
I think that there's issues that'll be faced around this time with men, particularly young men, interacting with the internet that probably won't be shared, or the wramifications of won't be known for a while.
Yeah.
In that, I think that we're among some of the earliest generation of men that grew up with an internet of some kind from our childhood. I think my family got dial-up when I was around 8 or 9 years old.
Yeah.
And we did not have parental units that were literate in the internet and knew how to guide us in using the internet in a way that is healthy and appropriate. And so when I think about future generations of young men growing up, I hope one of my optimistic hopes for the future is that guys round about our generation can figure out how to lead their sons, their loved ones, in navigating those spaces.
The
Because
internet in a more healthy way.
I think that it's really easy for young men to fall into some corners of the internet that are, well, and we're going to talk about echo chambers here soon,
Yeah.
that aren't places where if the young man was talking to their family about him, that they would be getting positive feedback like, yeah, I think you should keep going on that internet forum that, talks about this, that, or the other thing. And I think that, we're at an interesting time in the history of the internet, that we're about to have that generational turnover, and we're going to see how it turns out. How well as a species are we going to handle protecting our kids on the internet? I would argue that, unfortunately, despite my optimistic hope that we're going to figure it out, I don't think we're doing great. I don't think the kids are all right on the internet.
No, I'm doing a presentation series
Yeah.
called "The Boys Are Not All Right." I think that it's,
Also, sorry, shout out. Our song, intro song is "The Kids Are Gaslit," and I forget by who, but special credit to him, Creative Commons fair use.
it's kind of funny. I also think that for the dads that are out there,
Yes.
maybe even watching this podcast, I have definitely seen in my counseling practice just how difficult it is to like parent kids on technology nowadays. That it's very difficult. I see also a generational gap, even like between me and the kids that I work with, which is kind of wild because I feel like I'm quite tech literate, where it seems like there's a desire just to be like, online all the time. That if you're not using technology, you're not really like, leisuring even, which is kind of a wild thing. But I just want to acknowledge like how difficult it is to like kind of, go past that generational gap. And I think that if we, are hoping to do that, at some point it's going to have to be, you're going to have to listen to your kid. You're going to have to understand what they're wanting, where they're coming from, but also, hold fast to the expectations that you set for them. It's difficult. It's kind of like an ongoing process. I do want to acknowledge that, like, I see that a lot, and that the generational gap, especially between like teachers and students, sometimes can be like a difficult thing to watch. I also think that, you hit on really one of the most difficult challenges of the internet that I think is really one of the greatest challenges of the 21st century, is kind of this like confirmation bias, group polarization effect that goes on the internet. I think that men are absolutely victims to this, where confirmation bias is basically the concept that it feels very good to hear something that you want to hear. You're not interested in hearing something that tells you that you're wrong, because that doesn't feel good. And so the internet, the algorithms that Reddit, Facebook, X, all these platforms are putting out, are gearing content and clicks that you are gonna, take a look at, and then they want you to click on it because they think that you're gonna feel good if you click on it. And so, if you don't like Donald Trump, they're gonna say something that's bad about Donald Trump, and then you're gonna click on it, for example. And so that's just kind of one example there. But then you're not receiving, the other side of, kind of that story, and because of that, this confirmation bias goes on, where you're just seeking out information that really you already kind of know and are interested in hearing more about. And as this gets more and more serious, we kind of get into this like group polarization effect, where you really are kind of in your own echo chamber. You're kind of only in your own bubble, which, to be honest, I feel like sometimes I'm in my own bubble, like in the real world too, but online especially, without the interpersonal interaction, without reading people's like nonverbals. A lot of communication is actually nonverbal, and that's lost, when you're online. Not to say that you can't go hang out with your friends online, but if, we're kind of in that exclusively online space, we're missing like the nonverbal communication. And so if you kind of upset someone in the group, and they kind of, like start looking the other way and going like this and whatever else, when you say something, you can't really get that like, oh my gosh, I hurt that person's feelings, reaction there. And so you can just really get more and more into your own like space and opinion.
Not to mention, if you upset someone, or someone upsets you on the internet, you can just shut them off. You can block them, report them. You can go to a different website. There are so many ways that, and in no way am I discrediting, the issues that we as a society are having with like cyberbullying or anything like that. I understand that it's not immediately easy to just turn off the internet, but in a lot of ways for confirmation bias, or at least a conversation around it, there's this cultural acceptance of it. It's just a fact that I don't have to listen to people that I don't agree with anymore. And I think it's seeped into this underlying assumption where it's not even something that we question very often.
Yeah, where you live in your own world and you're not even like challenged to like jump out of it. It's not really a thing. And I do want to briefly back up to like the nonverbal thing, because I'm totally a therapist. This is how I always operate, is I immediately think of a counterpoint to the thing that I just said. And so, you know, there is like subtext that you see in text messages. And to be honest, like I feel like sometimes as a millennial, I'm like behind on the times on like subtext, that I'll be like, okay, you know, what am I supposed to do here? This person just kind of said nice. And I'm like, well, I don't really want to respond to just a nice, you know, what's going on. And, you know, I might get killed in the chat at some point for making a comment like that. But regardless, I think that there is some subtext in there that's meaningful and interesting. And I think that that should be acknowledged too, because, you know, like, yeah, people experience the world in different ways. But yeah, I do think that group polarization is a significant effect that I wish that just about everyone in society was aware of, and I think that especially guys who are on the internet are going to be finding that is, you know, a significant part of their online experience. And so if you're not aware already, just know what social media is trying to get you to click on things, and that you know, that's a piece of the experience.
I think it would actually be useful, since, I mean, tongue-in-cheek, we're saving the world, to just talk about the grift that it is. I think there are lots of reasons and benefits that someone might be shoved down a particular route or way of thinking on the internet. But one of the most common ones is making money, right? Selling a book, whether it's or selling a book, selling an event, tickets to, you know, your secret live stream or your Patreon, things like that. We say as guys that are just streaming on Twitch and have no idea what we're going to do in the future, but there's like this level of awareness that there are people on the internet. I won't name in particular, but there are some people that, you know, will come on and they'll claim to have some sort of level and maybe have legitimate degrees in like psychology or something like that. And they'll say, listen to me, I'll tell you why your good advice from your parents was good, and why all the things that you didn't like all about your parents, you're right about that too. And then when you buy my book, I'll tell you how to have a good life.
Yeah.
And that's the part. You buy my book. And so that requires a couple of things. It requires, any con requires a sucker. I'm sorry to say it, but it does. It requires somebody that is going to be convinced. And the internet has had this awe-inspiring and almost terrifying effect of serving up suckers to people that are looking to act upon that. The algorithm of TikTok notices if you linger a bit longer on ones that are saying, you know, here's some advice for somebody that is self-diagnosing with this, that, or the other thing. Insert other can of worms that we could open up and talk about, but we will do at a later date.
There is and this person kills me, but there's like a 20-year-old like influencer on Instagram that's often suggested to me, who is like a parenting coach. And as a child psychotherapist, I just go, oh my God, like this guy has no degree and he's just doing this. But also, like, you know, if he's helping people, I'm kind of like, well, I don't know. Who am I to say, you know, what he's doing is wrong? But he's kind of like doing my job without like, you know, having the degree or the license. And so there's the life coaching, you know, kind of issue there.
Yeah.
Yeah, where
I
life
think
coaching is kind of an unregulated industry that's, you know, folks are in related to therapy. You were saying.
Oh, I think it's important to remember too, or I think for me, it's also helpful to give respect to the people that are doing this on the internet. I don't think
give respect to grifters.
Yeah, I think that we often see things like I'm in particular thinking of, I get TikToks that sent to me of a guy. He'll take a bite of a sandwich and he'll have some dumbass take. He will say something that is not educated in whatever political issue he's talking about, whatever it is. And the thing is the algorithm loves when we interact. It loves when we comment and correct people, and
they want to make controversial content.
Yes.
Content is what you're saying.
The
Where
mastery
the guy,
of this is knowing that you're saying something foolish, or knowing that you're saying something that's going to get a lot of people to talk to you about it.
Yeah.
Because those interactions, the old adage of any press is good press is very true in a society where the press is dying. Sorry if you're finding out now.
I think the press would agree with you.
Yeah, the press is dying, and individual users are providing the content that we're all consuming.
Yeah, I do have a lot of mixed feelings about TikTok gurus. As a mental health professional, I think just be super cautious about who you're, reading on TikTok, and seeing on TikTok, and making sure you're kind of vetting them. What kind of qualifications do they have? Not that they have a resume on TikTok, but if it says, a licensed therapist, then it's yeah, okay, I might listen to this person. If it doesn't say licensed therapist, I may be I don't know about this person.
Even then, though, don't listen to us. I mean, listen to us, but
well, I think
even then.
The greatest challenge of modern society is to hear what someone else is saying, think about what they said, and then consider taking what you want and leaving the rest.
Yeah.
That's what my advisor would tell me in my PhD program.
Mm.
But I do think that if we're talking about TikTok and kind of gurus, let's kind of go there. Andrew Tate was initially was creating TikTok content and was popularized there. For those who don't know, Andrew Tate is generally a frowned upon man who actually is sometimes smiled upon by certain men. He very much advocates for a traditional approach to masculinity and family, and has kind of gone off the deep end, if you're asking
currently
me.
Indicted and being held in a foreign country for sex trafficking.
Yes, so there's that. So we don't like him, just so you know. But at the same time, if you're listening and you do like him, we want you to keep listening, because I just, I know that you're fellow guys too, and I'm just so glad you're here and have been listening to us. But yeah, just because we have a different opinion on that than you doesn't mean we don't, maybe look at things and in a similar way, and sometimes. But he definitely made a lot of, I know young women concerned when their boyfriends were talking about Andrew Tate. I would see some posts on Reddit this guy's got really into this. What should I do? And then everyone's dump him, and it's a whole thing. But really, to me, what Andrew Tate represented is someone is trying to talk to men and do men's work when no one else is really trying to do it. Because sometimes if you're doing men's work, and this is a men's mental health podcast after all, there's two things that you could possibly say. One is you're trying to feminize men or get them to talk about their feelings, which is a whole why is that even thing? And then the second thing that you might hear from the opposite side of the spectrum is if you talk about men, it's very anti-women. You're not being an ally to feminists, if you're talking about men. And so it's kind of well, then what the fuck are we supposed to do? Hate to drop the first F-bomb on our podcast.
Hey, yo, first fucking F-bomb. Podcast 1.
But it doesn't really make sense. And so because Andrew Tate was courageous to talk to men were listening, especially young men. And they heard something that was very, just the world is out to get you in a way. And that,
to go back to describing the grift, right? I think that I would be willing to sit on the opposite side of a debate on, do I think that Andrew Tate has a genuine interest in helping men or not? But regardless, I think describing the grift, I think that that appeal of I'm this man, right? I'm this macho man that I've got multiple sexual partners. I've got lots of money. I've got the cars. I've got I'm good at everything that I do, is a image that he presented, right? Is a product that was being sold, right?
That you could be the guy with the hot car and the hot girl and the exciting life where you're sex trafficking people in Eastern Europe. A very wonderful picture.
Yeah, and so I think if you're trying to sell a product, right, you're trying to sell that, the men that you're looking for, the men that you're hoping to find, are ones that maybe are lonely, or maybe would be in that category we were talking about earlier.
Are the people who are not in person with their friends twice a week, who are spending a lot of time on Discord and TikTok, and are vulnerable to having just one person on TikTok dominate the situation. And so, the algorithm of TikTok fed young men Andrew Tate. and continues to feed men.
And it worked.
And it worked, and it continues to work today.
Yep.
If you browse on YouTube for like gym videos, you're eventually gonna be pushed into embrace masculinity, and this and that and the other thing. And I embrace masculinity, to be honest. But sometimes that video series that I have seen before, sometimes it's just like, okay, I just take a deep breath, and I'm gonna go back to my Reddit feed or go talk to my friends instead.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think it's important to recognize that the internet is shoving men into kind of this like there's only one way to be a man, and it's to be in this kind of alt-right situation. And I know that is sort of an area where we were about to finish the first half of our podcast too. We're actually after
we're running over on time, but that's
point.
all right.
But yeah, Ben had
we're
something
gonna jump into poorly. Speaking of other men's material and spaces online, social media online, spaces for men. I feel like right before when we were thinking about what are we going to do about the podcast, I was like, you know what? I feel like I get fed regardless of whether it's on Reddit, TikTok, Instagram. I will get these posts where it's like, it'll be the Statue of David, or it'll be some other classical European artwork, right? Which, if we want to talk about the grift, we can go about that later, but we're running on time. And you got your philosophy quotes. We've got it'll be my Instagram feed will often be a couple muscled people, some miniatures, or maybe Magic the Gathering, and then it'll be like a quote from Marcus Aurelius or something like that. And with
Thanks for that
like
picture, Ben.
with like a picture of the Statue of David for some reason, and I think, as we've been talking about, the way that the internet funnels you down and in, I'm very aware that in some way, 7 degrees of Kevin Bacon from me to watching Andrew Tate, I'm closer than I was when I was looking at, say, Magic the Gathering material or something like that. When I see these these posts that are like venerating, particularly Stoicism. The Manosphere really loves Stoicism right now. Maybe not the Manosphere.
The Manosphere
is about Stoicism.
The Manosphere and Stoicism is right now.
So,
if you're not aware.
As a result, let's talk about philosophers. Let's do some poorly explained philosophy right now.
I'm gonna put on my best listening face because poorly explained philosophy is where one of us is going to explain to the other person something, and so Ben is gonna take his turn explaining this philosopher to me, and I'm gonna listen, which is a great way. You should listen to your friends when they're talking to you.
Yeah, we're gonna talk about Diogenes today.
Great.
And Max had mentioned that he had heard a little bit of Diogenes before. Perhaps you have as well. I'm gonna take a drink here so that I can get through this.
It's a name that I am familiar with, but yeah, I definitely want Ben to be able to explain it to me in the way that he wants to.
Yeah. So really fast, Diogenes is part of the tradition that eventually evolves into cynicism, which we get the words like cynic from.
Yeah.
Again, poorly explained philosophy. It's the world kind of sucks, man. Way of looking at things, right? It's not. It's super not. But that's what we're going to go with for today.
Yeah.
Diogenes is a contemporary of Plato. So you might have heard of him. Platonic relationships, things like that. Plato.
Yeah.
That guy. Who himself, Plato was a student of Socrates. And that's where we get the beginning of philosophy. Again, it's poorly explained. I don't even know if I'm on screen. Yeah, there we go. Okay. Again, it's poorly explained. I know that that's incorrect. And you know what? Maybe that's part of the grift. Maybe I want you to talk about it. So everybody thinks Socrates is the bee's knees, and Plato is now from this lineage of Socrates. He's got the street cred to be making speeches and giving lectures and educating the youth of Greece and the Greek city-states. And Diogenes actually gets notoriety as this guy that would crash the lectures and heckle Plato. He was unapologetic in excess. He disputed all of his interpretations of Socrates and would interrupt lectures. For example, when Plato declared at lecture one day that mankind is a featherless biped, Diogenes went out and purchased a chicken and removed all of the feathers from the chicken, and then came into the class and announced before all of the students that he had found Plato's man, a naked chicken. Right? This guy's level of don't give a fuck was very high.
What a shithead.
He was often cited, and this is in multiple sources, so more than one writer wrote about Diogenes carrying a lamp throughout the city during the daytime.
Yeah.
On purpose, so that people would ask him, what are you doing carrying a lamp in the daytime? So that he could then point the lamp towards particularly men and say, I'm looking for a good man. I still cannot find one. He had this strong sense that none of us were good. Cynicism, right?
Sure.
Society was meant to be criticized. He also lived a very minimalist life. He thought that comforts were distractions from the truths of the universe, in a sense. And so he lived in a empty wine jar for a time down in the market. And his only possessions were his wine jar, his cloak, and a bowl. And
what about that lantern?
Right? I don't know what happened to the lantern. But I do know that at one point he went down to the river to collect his water for the day, and he saw a poor child, cupping their hands to drink. And he threw out his bowl, and one of the most famous quotes from Diogenes is, "Fool that I am, I have too many possessions." It was in that moment he realized that he was even relying too much on the bowl. His mentor was Antisthenes, who was less famous, right? I think your random chance of saying, "Do you know who Diogenes is?" on the street, already pretty low of getting a yes. But
Antisthenes is even worse.
Antisthenes is even worse. And Diogenes actually was such a good friend to Antisthenes. It is a component of the nickname that he developed among philosophy, as the dog of Antisthenes. This guy was so down for his homie. History remembers him as being a dog for his friend.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about Antisthenes because of that. Finally, the most impressive and the most I am him thing that Diogenes did was at one point, while in the Mediterranean Sea, his ship was captured by pirates, and he was taken to a slave market to be sold. And when they went amongst the slaves and they asked them to announce to the buyers what were their professions, what could they do, Diogenes cleverly announced to the crowd that if he were to be purchased, the only thing that he is good for is ruling other men. One of the aristocrats of Athenian society at the time that was there purchased him because he was so amused by the thought. He thought that surely this man would be an excellent tutor for his children. And some texts have Diogenes dying that day, and some of them have him
tutoring,
living happily ever after, being a wise old teacher for rich people. So, live long enough to see yourself become the villain or die a hero. Pick one or the other, I guess.
Well, I think that teaching is never a bad profession to be in.
True.
But it's interesting. There's a masculine energy to Diogenes there that's contrarian. No, I don't want that. I want to argue this other way.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that a lot of guys have definitely felt that if someone says something, you just want to say no. I want to say the other thing. I don't want to do that. I definitely see that in boys a lot of times where you'll tell them to do something and they just go, no, I want to go do this other thing. And so I see Diogenes as kind of a personification of that in a way back then.
Yeah, to an extreme.
Yeah. There's a humor to what he's saying where everything is funny and he wants to be contrary to everything.
Mm-hmm.
And so, if you have a spirit like that within you, use it well.
Yeah.
Is what I would say.
Yeah. And I think inherently that's helpful, right? I think that we don't improve as a society if all of us just have blinders on the sides of our eyes and we never critically think about the reasons why we do things.
Yeah.
Or the absurdity of it all occasionally. Yeah.
Everything is absurd, Ben.
It is.
Even this podcast.
Even this podcast.
And so I believe
To bring us back to
Yeah.
the internet, we're gonna have ourselves a good old fashioned question of what's the manosphere? What is this shit? What are men's rights spaces, Max?
Yeah. So the manosphere, I read a book that described it as a nice garden where men are gathering online to talk about
Okay.
men's concerns. And my opinion on the manosphere is not that dreamy.
Okay.
My opinion on the manosphere is specifically as a manosphere online. A lot of times, it is a place where people are going to say not the nicest things about women, to not say the nicest things about other men, to become more kind of lonely and isolated and kind of radicalized in their own ideology of, kind of negativity. And not the negativity of Diogenes, of just kind of being a shithead when you want to be a shithead. Really more of a negativity of just like being negative about like the world. So my opinion on the manosphere is not like super great. I do think that there's some situations where you don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, where if men are supposed to gather in a tribe, Jack Donovan, sure, yeah, men should be in community, absolutely, take ideas like that. But I do think that there are a lot of really difficult and dangerous spaces that create like the incel involuntary celibate movement.
Mm-hmm.
The involuntary celibate movement is basically a bunch of guys who are like worried they can't get laid or they can't get girls.
Yeah.
And
They think that society has
Yeah.
deemed them this category, hence involuntary.
Yes, that
Yeah.
they're involuntarily celibate, and because of that, some of them have even, like revered former school shooter from California who was, claiming his college experience was ruined because of sorority girls not wanting to sleep with him, and so things like that is like, oh man, that's kind of
Yeah.
crap, and so those places exist online, and to me, that is the manosphere, and that's like men's rights spaces. Not to say that there isn't dialogue that happens that's good about men online, but I consider the manosphere to be kind of like there's a little bit of darkness in there, a bit, or maybe more than a little bit.
As somebody that doesn't really interact much with the manosphere and purposefully hasn't, even though we decided that this was going to be part of the topic, let me pose for you kind of hold two things for me really quick and tell me what you think about them. I hear you say that these are spaces where you said one of the things that you said that stuck out with me was a place where men can go to like complain about women. And one of the thoughts that I had, or one of the things I'm going to ask you to hold on to while I think the other thought is if those spaces didn't, right, well, what would the effect be if we didn't have a space where that could happen? And then the subsequent thought, or the other thing I guess I'm wondering if you could hold on to and tell me what you think about it, is do you think that there could be a space, right, where a young man seeking advice about women could go and have a better experience than what they currently have? Because I think, as we've already talked about, the reality is that if I'm not a very social guy, I don't have a third space that I go and I talk with other guys, and I'm going online and I'm looking for advice from other men on the internet, and I say, I'm thinking, I'm starting to think that I'm interested in this girl and I don't know how to ask her out, or I've been dropping hints and I think she might not be into me. What should I do, guys?
Yeah.
The advice that they're going to get is likely going to be, or in a lot of places, maybe not likely, but unfortunately likely, it's going to be funneling them towards this. There's a lot of incels that want to tell you, because of their opinion about the world, they want to tell that young man all of the horrible things that, this lady is just interested in him for money, or all of these other things, what
Almost
have
like
you.
where they want to spread their
But
ideology.
I almost wonder if it isn't important that there are spaces, right? If we could just do better at handling those young men when they are having an issue, and hearing them out, letting them say their piece, and then talking with them, I would argue that there's some level of importance that a young man should be allowed to ask questions that are hard, that maybe they don't like the answer to, but I think that there is some level of, if we're coming from a pure spirit of self-education and self-improvement, if we could have a space where young men could ask questions like that, young men that might be at risk of becoming one of somebody that self-identifies like as an incel, or let alone move forward or sideways to becoming violent, letting them share those thoughts so that we can talk about them in a college of ideas where they can be weighed against the merits of other arguments, and then gently guided to a maybe a more socially inclined way of thinking is probably good. We should probably have those.
Let's say, if there's a guy across from me, and he goes, I'm an incel. Girls don't want to be with me. I hate myself. I wish that, I believe in entertain, and I wish that, like society was just structured in a way where, girls actually respected men nowadays. I look at that man and say, it sounds like you're feeling very lonely. It sounds like you feel like, no one cares about you, that no one is ever going to care about you, and that nothing's ever going to change, and you're just going to live a whole miserable rest of your life. And that makes me very sad. Like really, like deeply, deeply sad.
That's one of those, it makes me think about, I'm drawn to the thought that when you're sick for a while, and maybe it's because I've got a bit of a sore throat I'm getting over, but when you're sick for a while and you've been sick so long you don't remember what it feels like to be healthy, it sucks. And
it beyond sucks.
Yeah, it really sucks. And I think there's something to that. When you've been feeling that dejected by society, that rejected by society,
that burned out.
That sucks. Like, and it can be hard to imagine an existence where you are not feeling that way, right? And so it can be really hard to crawl out of once you're there.
There are some really inspiring stories out there of folks who made it out of the incel movement. And so if you are in that movement, you're finding yourself watching today, I encourage you to seek out some of those spaces. I believe there's a subreddit about it. But yeah, so it's really difficult. And so in therapy, the idea is that everything is safe to say. And so if someone is able to express their feelings, but I feel like no woman is ever gonna love me. I think that as a guy, that's really important to hear. I also think that, if you're a gay male and you're worried about men loving you, you need to be able to kind of express that too, although the, experience there is a little bit divergent from, the typical incel experience that we're identifying online. I guess to your point, I think that it's important for them to be able to express it, but I worry about it only being online. And I think that the more that we socialize men to kind of just be only independent and not lean on a community of men, that being in space with men is not something that's prioritized, then I think that more guys are going to fall into this incel movement because they feel like they can't express, they're worried that if they say, this in front of someone else, that, I'm worried no woman is going to love me, they're going to get canceled or something like that. Or they're going to say, no, women's experiences are worse. And, a lot of times, if they do express that, they are going to hear that. But then, hopefully they have enough resilience in a community with men where they can have constructive conversation and say, I get that you feel that. And here's, a few ways that I'm going to make you feel better about yourself, because we're going to go to Dave & Buster's and, suck some fucking ghosts up in Luigi's Mansion Arcade.
Let's talk a little bit about what some of those. Let's go back to, I guess, because I've got a bone to pick about the naming conventions of what we're calling the spaces where men get together online. So re-educate me a bit, because I don't actually remember specifically which ones. I just remember
so
damn, since when did we allow other people to choose language like this?
So far, we've talked about the manosphere online, but in our script we had talked about men's rights.
Men's rights.
As a space.
Yep. And men's lib.
And men's lib or men's liberation.
Yes, were the three we kind of talked about.
Yeah, and so the manosphere, I feel like, is is somewhat equivalent to the men's rights spaces online, where it's definitely associated with kind of the alt-right and guys who are really advocating for a more traditional sense of gender, really, wanting, maybe at times they're aligned with some of the things that a men's liberation movement might be with, but most of the time they're really hoping for a more traditional experience of men. There's some pretty wild things that they'll say, legalizing sexual assaults, or things like that. Really insane.
Now, to clarify, that kind of thing comes out of the manosphere.
The manosphere.
Now, tell me about the men. Oh, both of those.
Yeah, those are both to
Separate
me,
those two
they're
for me.
hand in hand a little
They're
bit.
hand in hand a little bit.
I,
Okay.
I feel that they're hand in hand ideologically. I think
Sure.
that men's rights maybe is more specifically thinking about like legal, advocacy, whereas
Yeah.
manosphere can be more of a broad, like, this is men's work, but it's definitely still feeling like it's, somewhat ideologically aligned over there. But also
Sure.
like, again, we've got the baby with the bathwater situation where like, yeah, sure, there are definitely going to be some nuggets like in the manosphere where it's like, I could be a better man if I did this.
Yeah.
I could be a better man if I did this. I would teach my son this.
Tell me
Like,
about the men's lib space then. Give me the elevator of that, because I got a question for you.
Yeah, so men's liberation movement is the idea that men, kind of need to be liberated from the shackles of exactly, what they've been told to have to do for generations upon generations, which is interesting because for feminism, it was a little bit easier because women are being elevated to the status of men, but men are not supposed to, lower themselves to the status of women, quote unquote, which is kind of a ridiculous thing to think about. But that's where the, you don't want to feminize men like comes from. And so, asking men to have emotional mastery, which, to be honest, the result of emotional mastery is inspiring speeches from Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. or whoever else you find inspiring, right? To me, that's emotional and intellectual mastery, which,
Sure.
One of some influential men of all time, obviously mastered that. So men's liberation is kind of this idea that you don't have to be exactly what society prescribes to you, and that you're not necessarily in like those binds anymore.
So, bringing up another men's issue that we haven't talked about yet, but a man might go on the internet to seek advice about. Let's say I'm a guy that's struggling with trying to navigate or find support, particularly social support, around issues of custody, whether it's a previous marriage or children without marriage. And I'm struggling with custody, and I want to talk with other people about the experience I've had either in the court system or with my previous partner or with lawyers, things like that. I imagine that all three of these spaces we've talked about have conversations around men's rights around custody of their own children, and opinions on them. And first of all, I guess, is that true? Would you say that the manosphere, both the manosphere and the men's liberation movement, are having conversations about things like fatherhood and custody?
I think that fatherhood and custody, a lot of times you'll find in men's rights spaces a bit more because that's something they're feeling a little bit more concerned with, whereas men's liberation is more concerned with making sure that men don't have to be like in a certain role. But at the same time, I feel like if you go on Men's Lib and you say, I'm struggling with this like custody thing, like what's, like going on?
Yeah.
I think that is a question that, I would want to jump up and say, hey, dude, like, I know this sounds really difficult and hard. And yeah, a lot of times there's a perception that the system is really biased, towards women. But at the same time, it's kind of like, in a situation where there's like, abusers and like stuff like that, it gets so much more complicated. But yeah, I think that, if you're a guy and you're seeking help on that, I think like a men's lib forum would be where I would encourage you to go. I think that men's rights can be just difficult. But yeah, I guess, the question that I would ask myself if I'm reading content online is this making me feel better and more relaxed? Or is this making me feel more hateful inside, more angry? Angry is a better word, I would say. Like, am I more angry after reading this? Or am I more at peace? And if it's making you feel more angry, I'd consider just seeking content elsewhere.
Sure. What gets me though is, as far as I understand, to me at least, as somebody that's just kind of learning about some of these terms and the ways we describe men's spaces for communication on the internet. There's something that just tickles me in an odd way of, it sounds like, based on your description and some other descriptions you've given me off of this podcast, that I wouldn't necessarily like the label of like a men's rights activist being applied to me. And I understand and have heard a fair bit of like the history and whatnot around that, but I think I just get stuck so much on the Webster's dictionary definition of words in around like, I think that's really unfortunate that a reality for men is if I want to go have a conversation about a man's right to access to his children, if I type in men's rights, custody, I'm probably going to get some conversations that maybe you or I would say are not ones that we would encourage people to engage in.
Yeah, if they're making
Right.
you feel more angry,
Yeah.
certainly, I mean, there's like facts. Like if a men's rights forum has like a fact that's like helpful. I mean, that's one thing, but it's
Sure.
yeah, if you're reading content that's making you feel more angry, that's when you kind of be
Yeah.
like, oh, I don't know about that. But yeah, I think that I hear the lamentation of just like someone else owns the word.
Yeah.
It's kind of like
Yeah. Yeah. Because
Yeah.
I think that not that proportionally there are any more significant rights that need to be talked about or shared or anything like that. But I think that to me it scares me as a student of history that to take categorically an entire part of our language to just cut it, hamstring it and cut it off at the knees and say, if something funny happens in our society 60 years from now, there might be a connotation that the words men's rights carry that will hinder that conversation needing to happen and protecting our young men in some way, right? And so I guess that and it's just sad to hear or to think that it seems like there are a lot of people who are interested in getting people to think a certain way. And I'm going to particularly say, I mean, we don't have time to all the way go through it. We added as a touch point like the alt-right pipeline and, into the manosphere, into inceldom.
The TikTok, Facebook algorithms are sending people down.
Yeah.
Pipelines of just feeling more and more angry. And then suddenly social media use is driven by anger and not even necessarily by pleasure. And then your life is just more angry than it used to be. And when your life is driven by anger, predictably, you're not a very happy person.
I think it's unfortunate, too, that because of that and the monetization of it, as a result, we're kind of like societally encouraged to make more content that will piss you off.
Yeah, make more angry men.
Yeah.
That's what content is, encouraged to be created. So I do think, as we're kind of running past, like, our initial hour here, just like, what are we actually doing? What are we actually doing about this is, I think, a really good question.
Yeah.
And what do you think?
Well, I think the solution to some of what I was just complaining about or saying just now would be fostering or interacting online in such a way that it does encourage people to seek out their support systems in person, right? If you happen to be somebody that's in one of these spaces where people are talking about things like men's and women's roles in society, like you think if you're near inceldom or something like that on the internet, recognize that there are a lot of voices pulling back down or pulling down into the vortex, and not a lot saying, "Meet me outside," which literally meet me outside and
meet me outside
or meet right. Meet your friends outside, meet your community outside of the internet. I think that that's an important thing to say, and so as we're gonna say, shut this off, go touch grass after we're done. Of course.
Go touch grass.
Yes. Yeah, go touch some grass. Yeah. What do you think? What do you think are some solutions that you have offhand? Fix the world right now.
Yeah, I think it's difficult to fix the world with a few comments, but I think that if we're looking at risk for going down difficult pipelines with online content, I think that there's nothing better than touching grass, and, it's kind of silly that, touch grass is almost like this insult nowadays of like, you're not even touching grass outside. It's this whole thing. But I think that if you are engaging in, a third space that's outside of your online community, or even if you just like have a space where you feel like you can be listened to, which I think is sometimes difficult for men to encounter because a lot of times men aren't socialized to listen to other folks. I will say that research suggests that men really define friendships by shared activities. And so if you're feeling like, you're not even connecting with folks on, something else, or you're not talking about stuff, even just starting like an activity with someone, joining some kind of rec sports league, or finding, think about your hobbies, going out and doing something like that can be a good way to kind of prevent you from getting into some of those negative pipelines, or if you're finding yourself in those pipelines, like doing that too. Or if you're just feeling lonely, finding a community like that, thinking about your hobbies, or even just coming and tuning into us, every week.
Yeah, tuning into us. Another thing that we had written down was vote. You can vote.
Yes. If you're worried about the future of society, voting is important. We're in
It is
U.S.
important.
election season, and so if you find yourself in the U.S., we strongly encourage you to register to vote
Yes.
now, and then go vote.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the website is vote.gov, but that, I don't know. Not a sponsor.
I'm not sponsoring the government.
Not sponsored by the government.
No. Where are my taxes going? I think I'm sponsoring
Oh,
the
yeah,
government.
we might be. Oh, and then check on your neighbor was the other one that we had, that you had written down.
Yeah, so it's actually, there's a lot of really good research that suggests that if you're being, nice to someone else, or being like gracious, or saying thank you, like gratitude actually like really like calms your brain in a lot of ways. And so if you feel like no one is caring about you in your life, there is a way that you can care about someone else. And I will say that, as like a care provider, like as a therapist, that there's so much meaning that I get from just like helping other people like find their way, whether they're kids or adults. And so just know that you're capable of doing good, even if sometimes you think that you're not, because you're so burned out and so hopeless. But I know that there's always like a call that I kind of feel when someone is having a bad day around me, and I just kind of look at them, and I everything, all my stress just kind of melts, and I go, no, like this person needs me right now, and I'm here to make the world a better place. And checking on your neighbor can be a really good way to help you feel good about yourself, and give do something good for your heart.
Yeah. So one of the things that we mentioned, I don't think we mentioned it first. One of the things we mentioned was watch Ben and Max, and so you can catch this show again, a pre-recorded version of this. Hello, if you are watching next Monday at the exact same time, 7:00. This will run again, and then the following week, which I believe is the 4th. October 4th or October 5th. No, the Monday is the
2 weeks from today.
2 weeks from today, we are going to have an episode 2, which will be about. Remind me again.
We were doing gaming, I believe.
Internet culture, gaming.
Yeah, it's gaming, isn't it?
Was it people being shitty on the internet?
No, but that's what we're also talking about today.
Oh. I thought this was just how men use the internet.
This is about how men use the internet. And then episode 2, I'm going to look it up really quick. And then I'm really good at this. What am I doing with my life? Video games.
Video games. We're doing video games.
Yes, and so, yeah, like, how are men using video games? How are boys using video games? What does it mean for us? What are the difficulties that men are facing with that? And so on and so on. So yeah, and then I have a little quote to kind of end us out. Who saved the world? And so one of my most favorite authors of all time is Robert Bly. He's actually from Minnesota. Go Vikings, right? He passed away several years ago, but his book is up here. Robert Bly, Iron John. It's a close reading of some mythology, and really has a lot of important messages about masculinity. He really started the mythopoetic men's movement, having this idea that there's a wildness in masculinity that is like necessarily there, and you kind of have to tap into it to really be masculine in a certain way. And so one quote that I think from the book is super awesome is, the path to manhood is not an easy one, but those who venture into the wilderness find themselves. So I do think it's important to lean on the shoulders of folks who've come before us in terms of their knowledge. And I think that Robert Bly is one of those men that I'm proud to lean on with his knowledge and thoughts about masculinity. So.
Well, thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Go out and find